Once Gislin arrived, he immediately took a seat before his father, the two officials, and the knight captain. Albert, though seething with fury, remained silent, waiting for the Archduke to speak. Even Randolph and Homern could not guess what this young man had in mind. Meanwhile, though Zwalter was relieved that his son had returned alive from the Forest of Beasts, he couldn't bring himself to express his relief, for Gislin had defied his orders. Gislin calmly addressed his father, his voice carrying a childish tone. His words were simple, that he had returned. Zwalter reminded him that he had explicitly told him not to venture into the Forest of Beasts. Gislin apologized, stating that it was something that had to be done. This response only prompted confusion from Homern, who questioned what Gislin meant by that had to be done. Randolph followed, asking whether Gislin truly believed it was worth disobeying orders for. Entering the Forest of Beasts was a serious offense, Randolph added, emphasizing the danger not only to Gislin's life but to the estate itself, emphasizing the risk if monsters had poured out of the forest and attacked the estate. Gislin, undeterred by their scolding, calmly responded that he was still alive and no monsters had invaded the estate. His response only seemed to fuel Homern's anger, while Randolph shouted at him, demanding to know how he could dare speak back. Albert, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, asking whether Gislin found the situation amusing. Given that there had been no incidents in the Forest of Beasts this time, Albert suggested that they could let it pass, though his tone was tinged with frustration as he rummaged through his pocket. However, Albert then placed a letter on the table, making it clear that for this matter, there could be no excuses. Gislin immediately recognized the letter from Count Rayfold, asking if it was indeed from him. Albert confirmed it, explaining that he had suspected something would go wrong when Gislin visited Rayfold without warning. Worse, Gislin had extorted 20,000 gold from Lady Amelia, who had been regularly sending support funds to Perdium. This had enraged Count Rayfold, who was now severing his ties with the estate and calling off the engagement. Albert stressed that this was a serious issue that could shake the entire estate. Gislin took a moment to think. He was unbothered by the details of the report. He knew that manipulating a money-hungry count was not difficult, but it was clear that Amelia had resorted to working with an enemy to bring him down. Gislin realized that the leverage he had over her was now useless, and he understood that revealing her secret deals or merchant connections would be seen as attempts to cover up the situation. If he had been even a little late in entering the Forest of Beasts, he would have been trapped in the estate. Time, he thought, was not on his side. He placed the letter back on the table. Albert, urging Gislin to speak, questioned whether he had anything to say in response. Homern, interrupting, suggested that the 20,000 gold should be returned immediately. Randolph sighed, remarking that the amount would have covered the Knight Order's expenses for some time. Gislin responded simply, stating that he had spent it all. The four men were taken aback, but Gislin explained that he had used the money to develop the Forest of Beasts. To the others, this sounded like one of Gislin's usual reckless schemes. He was seen as having no concern for the future of Perdium's estate. Albert, still shocked, demanded to know if Gislin had truly burned through all that money on a forest full of monsters. Gislin, without offering excuses for his actions with Rayfold, simply apologized for the situation. Randolph, enraged, grabbed Gislin by the collar, cursing him as a reckless brat. He reprimanded Gislin for selling out the future of the estate with his own hands. Homern declared that Gislin Perdium was no longer fit to be the Archduke and demanded that Gislin be restrained and thrown into prison. In a calm, nonchalant tone, Gislin responded that he would personally provide the necessary support funds from now on, including the 20,000 gold. Zwalter, clearly perplexed, asked his son what he meant by that with a calm voice. Gislin, without hesitation, called out to Belinda, who had been waiting outside. She entered the room, holding a box in her hands. Gislin explained that if his goal had been merely to enter the Forest of Beasts and return, he would never have started its development. Belinda placed a box on the table, and as she opened it, the older men were initially confused by the glowing crystal inside. However, Zwalter immediately recognized it. Gislin revealed that was top-grade runestone. The recognition was immediate for those familiar with it, though Albert, seeing of it for the first time, expressed his surprise. Homern took the crystal and examined it closely, clearly impressed. He asked where Gislin had acquired such a valuable item. Randolph, still processing the discovery, accused Gislin of trading it for the 20,000 gold, though his face betrayed his shock. Gislin, however, responded nonchalantly, explaining that he had mined it from the forest of beasts. Belinda, standing nearby, shot an annoyed glance at the older man for doubting Gislin's words. Albert, still taken aback, noted that while the runestone was indeed valuable, it wouldn't nearly be enough to sustain the estate on its own. Gislin nodded in agreement, but assured them that this wasn't all of it. He then led the group to the outskirts of the estate, where the results of his expedition were displayed in full. Piles of high-grade runestone filled the area, with more being transported in by carriage. In addition, the corpses of various monsters, valuable for their remains, were being sorted by the mercenaries Gislin had hastily gathered for the mission. Homern, amazed at the scale of it all, asked Gislin how much of this had been collected in just 15 days. Randolph, even more astonished, questioned whether he was seeing things. Zwalter, equally surprised, turned to Belinda and asked if everything had truly been obtained during the expedition. Belinda responded with certainty, affirming that Gislin had personally led the effort and secured all of it. Gislin, with pride, explained that the haul included the remains of various creatures like the direst ant and the blood python, but that the runestones here were just a small fraction of what had been mined from the vein. He reiterated that the purpose of the development was to benefit the estate, and as such, everything should be used for its benefit. Albert, reviewing the situation, estimated that with this much material, they would no longer struggle with support funds. The realization struck Randolph and Homern, leaving them shocked and impressed. Their demeanor shifted as they approached Gislin, offering praise for his remarkable success. Randolph, acknowledging Gislin's exhaustion from the expedition, spoke first, expressing his admiration. Homern followed, offering his own compliments, and the two even massaging Gislin's shoulders in gratitude. Gislin, however, had a few conditions before he would offer his support. He listed them one by one. The first condition was the immediate release of Scovin and Ricardo, as they had only followed his orders. His second condition was that public access to the Forest of Beasts remain restricted, warning that unnecessary rumors could harm the estate. After considering these requests, Homern found them reasonable, but Gislin's third condition was far more contentious. He insisted that he would personally recruit and manage the mercenaries and security forces, as interference with the movement of troops within the estate would only waste time. Homern, alarmed by this suggestion, voiced his strong objection, demanding to know if Gislin was proposing to form a private army. Equally concerned, Randolph voiced his objection, questioning what Gislin might do with such an army. Albert, maintaining a more composed tone, stepped in to clarify the situation. He told Gislin that he was mistaken if he thought he could simply do as he pleased without interference. He reminded Gislin that his current position was one where he should be seeking forgiveness, not making demands. Gislin, however, calmly explained that he was only setting the necessary conditions to replace Rayfold's financial support. He added that delays in operations like these would have a negative impact on Perdium's finances. He then turned to Albert, challenging him to consider if he was truly fine with the consequences of such delays. Albert, momentarily speechless, had no immediate response. Seeing the tension escalate, Albert turned to Zwalter, urging him to intervene. He pleaded with his brother, asking him to take control of the situation before Gislin's demands jeopardized the future of the estate. However, Zwalter remained silent, watching the events unfold. Suddenly, a voice from behind called out to Gislin, drawing the attention of everyone gathered. It was Gillian, who greeted Gislin warmly. Kayer, standing nearby, also welcomed him with a smile, and Gillian praised Gislin for his efforts. Gislin responded affirmatively, acknowledging the praise, while the mercenaries who had joined them in the expedition stood in line behind Gillian, sharing in the sentiment of respect and admiration. Gillian reported the loading of the runestone was nearly complete and waiting for further instruction. With just a command, they would be ready to move at any time. Kayer, now speaking with more respect and calm, reported that, as instructed, the direst int bark had been stored without preservatives. He then asked what should be done with the blood python. Gislin gave the necessary instructions, telling them to dismantle the python's body, separating the venom, blood, flesh, and hide to prevent decay. The mercenaries responded affirmatively, ready to follow his orders. Zwalter turned to Randolph, clearly impressed by the mercenary's presence. However, he couldn't understand how Ghislain had managed to command such powerful individuals. Walter agreed, remarking that the mercenaries seemed like an elite unit. This prompted Ghislain to turn around and respond. He acknowledged the comment, but also explained that without the mercenaries' help, the expedition would have been extremely difficult. Walter, observing his son, saw him in a new light. Walter then commanded the officials to return. As he turned around to leave, the others hesitated for a moment, but followed, as he gave them no opportunity to question his decision. Before departing, Walter addressed Ghislain, choosing to overlook his action this time. However, he reminded his son that if he disobeyed his orders again, there would be consequences. Ghislain, grateful but firm, thanked his father and expressed that one day he would inherit the estate as its rightful successor. As he walked away, Walter remarked that Ghislain had the spirit of the Northern Wolf. The title referred to the Count of Perdium, who protected the northern frontier of the Kingdom of Lithuania. Ghislain's father, Walter, had led a lonely life. With weak military power and an estate suffering from poverty, he had been forced to defend the northernmost frontier for years. He had devoted his entire life to protecting the estate, without the company of his wife, Elena, or even his son. In the end, his reward had been a lonely and forgotten death. With the immediate tension subsiding, Kaur expressed relief, remarking that they could finally relax a little. Belinda, still concerned for Ghislain, asked if he was heading straight back to the castle. Ghislain replied that he wouldn't rest just yet, instructing Belinda to prepare everything so they could depart at any moment. Surprised, she asked if he wasn't going to rest. Gillian, noticing Ghislain's weariness, also suggested that he take some time to recover, pointing out that it was already a miracle he had survived being inside the blood python. Belinda sternly reminded him of the effort it had taken to detoxify the poison from his body and pleaded with him to rest before moving forward. Ghislain, though fatigued, tapped Belinda's shoulder and assured her that he was counting on her. Despite his exhaustion, he knew he couldn't afford to delay the mining process. Word of Perdium securing the runestone vein would spread quickly, and it would soon reach the ears of those who sought to claim the estate for themselves. Deciding to leave the rest to the trio, Ghislain turned to head back, though with each step, his breathing grew heavier. He knew they had to strengthen their forces as quickly as possible to a level where no one would dare challenge them. But before he could take another step, his body gave out. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Belinda immediately shouted his name, but even without an immediate response, all who had witnessed the fall of the Archduke